Welcome back for more Saw Story. Grab a drink, take a seat, double check that you're safe, and get ready for 5 true scary stories found on Reddit. This experience happened to my roommates and I in our second year of university. The city we went to school in was considered a very safe university town. The most we had heard of happening was drunk morons doing typical drunk moron things. This was also the first time that we were all really living on our own. First year residences are nice, but it's basically an extended summer camp rather than a typical living situation. The 4 of us girls lived in a nice townhouse that never once had a creepy vibe or weird neighbors in the months that we lived there. The only eerie part was that every weekend we were the only people who stayed in the complex. All of our neighbors either went home or stayed elsewhere until returning Monday for classes. This was never something we had given a second thought to, considering that was fairly normal for a university town, especially because our complex was only made up of about 4 other townhouses. The complex was surrounded by walking trails and farm fields, which we loved. It was like our quiet spot away from the chaos of college kids. There were a few farmhouses we could see from our backyard, but other than that, we were fairly secluded. The university was about a 20-minute bus ride away, which was never a big deal for any of us, especially because the rent was far cheaper here than in places that were within walking distance to campus. Being 5'6", I was the tallest by a considerable amount. I was also the only one out of our group who had been in a handful of scary situations. Due to this, I was the only one up to this point who would lock the doors, windows, and garage before leaving or going to bed. My roommates all grew up in small, very safe towns, so it was uncommon for them to lock doors back at home. They were also incredibly kind and trusting to everyone, never considering hidden bad intentions. The night in question started very normally. We had planned on having a wine and movie night. This was kind of like a weekly tradition for us. We would pick out some stupid movie, get takeout, and get a little buzz after a long week of classes and work. At this point, it was early November, so we had been doing this for several months with no issues. By 8:30ish, we had all settled onto the couch in our living room and had started a comedy. With it being November, it was already completely dark outside, other than our porch light, which we could see from the small window at the very top of our door. None of us were tall enough to see anything out of that window, so we relied entirely on our peephole. It took a great amount of effort for me to convince my roommates to check the peephole before opening the door. This was a talk we had after one roommate had opened the door for our neighbor's very drunk friend who threw up all over our main floor. Not long after ordering our takeout, we heard banging on the front door. Jess made a joke about how the delivery guy must have taken a helicopter to get here this quickly, especially considering the place we ordered from was very close to campus. But it wasn't a typical delivery guy's knock either. Between the few glasses of wine and carefree attitude of the night, we didn't really pay it too much mind. It was my roommate's turn to pay this week. I'll call her Meg for the sake of the story. Out of the group, she's the smallest, barely 5 foot. She's also the most trusting person I think I've ever met. She ran up to her room to grab her wallet, which took 30 seconds at most. During this time, the banging continued and was getting more aggressive. I figured maybe it was cold out or he had other things to do, so we yelled up to get her to hurry. The banging continued to get harder and harder, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. When she came back down, I told her to check the peephole before opening it, as she was usually the one to just open up. She got to the door and looked out the peephole. She could barely reach it on a good day, so when she said she couldn't see anything, my other roommate and I got up to help. My second roommate, I'll call her Jess, is a very funny person. There are very few things that she would not turn into a joke. Jess got to the door before I did and looked out the peephole, the person on the other side still banging away. When she turned to look at me, I knew something was wrong. She looked incredibly confused, a look I had rarely seen from her as she was very clever. Within a second, she had gone back in for another look. This time, her face was not confused. She looked afraid. This made my stomach knot up. She's a horror movie fanatic and doesn't really scare easily. "I think someone is covering the peephole," she whispered at us. This time, I looked out the peephole, seeing that yep, someone was covering the peephole. We could still see the porch light shining through the window at the top, so we knew it was not a case of it being too dark to be able to see what was going on. By now, our other roommate, whom I'll call Anne, had walked down the hall trying to find out what was going on. She was easily the drunkest of the four of us. Even sober though, she seemed to think she was invincible. "What is your problem? Open the door. The poor dude has his hands full," was Anne's wise idea. Jess and I explained what was going on. At this point, Meg, Jess, and I all had a gut feeling that something was wrong. That's when Jess asked Meg to check the website she had ordered our food on. It turns out Meg had not even placed the order. Between the wine and the silliness of the earlier night, she had selected our food but did not finish the last step. The banging continued as our situation started to sink in. Anne still did not seem to grasp what was happening and tried to unlock the door. "Stop!" I snapped at her. Immediately, I knew it was too loud. For the first time, the person on the other side of the door spoke. "This is the police. Open the door now. We have a few questions to ask you." A man's voice practically growled back at us. This sobered me up right away. I looked over at Meg, who was already welling up, then at Jess, who had gone completely pale. At this point, Anne also realized something was not right and froze, which is the least Anne thing she could have done. The banging was getting increasingly harder, to the point we could physically see the door breathe with each hit. Meg took Anne upstairs, trying to calm each other down and check if there was a police car parked outside, and make sure our windows were locked. Though it was hard to do, it was possible to get onto part of our roof that made it possible to get in through Anne's window. We heard a window slam, immediately knowing that it had been Anne's window. Being a bit of a thrill seeker, Anne had taken out her window screen in order to sit on the roof. For some reason, this made what was happening very real. "Show me your badge, then we'll open the door," I yelled back. Instead of a response, it sounded like the guy started to kick the door. I told Jess to call the police and ask if they had an officer dispatched to our address. Jess was shaking so badly at this point that it was hard for her to dial. Now Meg had come back down the stairs, sharing that there was no police car parked outside. Anne trailed behind her, standing at the stair landing, trying to get a look outside the window at the top of the door. At that moment, my blood ran cold, remembering that the man at the door had said "we" and not "I." Jess had just come to the same realization. She sprinted to our back door, a large sliding glass door, which she double-checked was locked. Thankfully, it had been. She drew the curtains as well, trying to minimize the chance of them seeing in. Within a minute, the knocking started at our back door as well. Thank God she had closed the curtains, because the idea of seeing whoever was doing that still gives me chills. "Uncover the peephole and show me your badge," I yelled again, trying to sound as intimidating as a young college girl could. We were met with silence, which was so much worse than the banging. "What is your badge number at least? Prove to us that you are the police," I screamed again, trying to keep my voice from breaking. The only response I got back was a gravelly, "I can't do that." Jess had handed the phone off to Meg, who was sobbing now, trying to speak to the dispatcher. The banging, now coming from both sides of the house, must have been heard by the operator. "Is there someone trying to break in?" she asked Meg, obviously being unable to understand her. Meg frantically asked if police had been sent to our house. The answer we all knew by now. It was no. Meg babbled that at least 2 men tried to get us to unlock the door by impersonating a police officer. "Try to stay calm, stay on the phone with me. Police are on their way to your address," the operator told Meg. "How long will they be?" Meg asked back. "No more than 10 minutes, she responded. That made Meg cry harder, realizing just how long 10 minutes really is. The door was being hit so hard I worried it would break. Jess ran back toward our back door, making me worry that our kitchen window had been open. Trying to think, I put a chair under the doorknob and sat down, hoping the door would hold. Jess came back to the front door holding a kitchen knife and a fire extinguisher, which were the only things we had to protect ourselves with in case they got in. Anne, now sitting on the landing, flinched with each hit. Anne was farm tough and had no issue dealing with animals 3 times her size. What was happening now, though, was entirely different. We had nothing to really deter whoever wanted in. No prods and no backup until the real police show up. Not like what she was used to. She grew up having family as her neighbors her whole life. If anything were happening, her uncles and grandfathers were at her front door in a minute flat. Anne's I'm invincible attitude was long gone. She was now as scared as the rest of us, only having some wood and glass between her and these men. Each hit to the back door made me expect whoever was there to break through the glass. "Open the door," the man yelled at us, not caring if we thought they were police anymore. Then it got very quiet again, which made me want to throw up. The only thing worse than what was happening was not knowing where the men were. The idea of both men moving to the back door made me absolutely terrified. If they really wanted to, it would be very little effort to smash through the plate glass. Instead, the knocking at the back door had completely ceased. Within minutes of that, the front door started being hit again. Trying to wrap my mind around why they would leave the easiest entry for a heavy wood door, I realized the back door was visible to the main road. Whether they had seen a car or heard us talking to the police, they were smart enough to not want to be seen by anyone. Jess then said something I had not thought of. "I don't think they want to rob us. There are so many houses that are empty. Why would they come to the only house with the lights on?" she hissed. My whole body went cold. I did not have an answer. All I could say was, "You're right." Meg clearly felt the same, because at this point she was practically hyperventilating. The 3 of us stayed quiet for a minute, awful scenarios running through our heads. Anne moved back up to the last few steps and out of sight of us. The operator, who we had forgotten was on the speaker, spoke, which practically made me jump out of my skin. She must have felt how terrified we were and tried to calm us down. "The police are 2 minutes away. They have their sirens turned off and the lights are on. You should be able to see them very soon. Stay on the phone with me so I can confirm when they are outside for you," she said. The men outside were starting to seem desperate. The sound of glass shattering had me turning to the back door, fully expecting to go into offense, but the door was still intact. Instead, our porch light, the only light illuminating our dark street, went out, which put 2 and 2 together for me. Understanding that they had destroyed the only way we would have been able to identify whoever was on the other side. Then, a voice we hadn't heard before, whoever was at the back door, spat out calling us names. This was worse than the initial speaker. It was full of so much hate and venom that it scared me more than the banging. He was so calm, intent on whatever his goal was. It didn't feel like how the first man had sounded. Up until this point, I could have convinced myself that they had only wanted our valuables, but this voice made me understand that he had wanted us. To this day, I have never heard a voice come close to that level of malice. It sounded like he wanted to inflict serious harm on us, and if he had gained entry, I know he would have. Somehow, I wanted the first man to speak again, instead of whichever sick individual had just spoken. I looked at Meg. I know how terrified I must have looked. Until now, I may have done a half-decent job of hiding how scared I was, but that voice ruined my ability to stay stone-faced. Meg looked like a scared little girl, and that made me panic. If they got in, there's nothing I would be able to do to stop them, not for me and not for my friends. We would have been at the mercy of the monsters outside. Jess had practically stopped breathing. It was like the oxygen had been sucked out of the air. It was so quiet, it sounded like a gunshot when our mailbox opened. Anne ran back down the stairs. "I see the sirens, they're coming down the main road now," she whispered, hoping to not have the men hear. The same man spoke again, one more time, so slowly that I almost thought he was done after each word. In that same awful, calm voice, he read out a letter addressed to the 4 of us. Our neighbor must have put it in today. She had planned a potluck for the next week. None of us thought to check the mailbox after we had talked to her in the driveway this morning. Jess, Meg, Anne, OP. Those are nice names. I'll be back soon, girls. Then we'll have some fun. I felt tears rolling down my face. I hadn't realized I had started crying, but I knew he meant what he had said. I tried to pull my mind out of the dark pit that sentence had sent it to, waiting, praying that the police had surprised them, hoping they would not get the chance to come back. The silence continued. None of us dared to speak, worried that we would not hear if they moved to another point of entry. Instead, the silence persisted for what felt like a lifetime. The operator was the first one to speak again, telling us that the police were out front. She told us to stay in the house until the police knocked on the door. The kind woman stayed on the phone with us for several more minutes while the police searched the area. Finally, the real police showed their badge to the peephole before even knocking to try not to scare us. The operator told us that we had done well and that we were in good hands now. We opened the door to be met by two kind-looking older police officers who we let in. Glass shards covered our front stoop from our porch light. It looked like it had been ripped out of the wall and smashed onto the concrete below. There were several police cars out front of our previously quiet home. The headlights on all of the cars were shining down the street towards the walking trail. We spoke to the officers who took a report from us. They asked us to describe the night's events in detail. They wanted to know if we saw them at all, and we explained how the peephole had been covered and the light had been smashed before moving away from the door. The officers advised us to speak to our landlord about, at the very least, security cameras. The older officer then closed the pad he had been writing in and looked up at us. He then spoke a phrase that made me understand how much danger we had been in. "Look, if any of you were my daughters, I would have wanted the officer to tell her, if you can get out of your lease, do it. They know where you all live, and they also know the response time for us, especially after telling you all that he would be back." After that, they asked if we had heard a vehicle. That was something I had not considered. We didn't hear any type of motor until the police were there. Even when Meg and Ann had went to look for a police car, they saw no cars on the street at all, so likely that meant they had come from the walking path, which would explain how they left without passing the police on their way back to the main road. The older officer of the two had a look that told me he had an idea where they were going. He looked sad, which was worse than if he had looked scared. I knew he had seen this situation end far worse in the past. We pushed for an explanation, but were only told that this had been an issue years ago, but did not elaborate past that point. The officer stood up, exchanged a glance that I did not know how to read, and then spoke again. "We will have a cruiser parked in the driveway, as well as a plain car around the back. They will not have a chance to try again." They did not catch the man in the 2 more weeks we lived there. The reality was they had not been caught, and they could come back any time. After this night, we spoke to our landlady, who was incredible. She owned several properties around the city, and when we explained what had happened, she let us move to an apartment closer to campus. She told us that our safety is more important than making a few $100s. She even left the house empty for many months in order to make sure cameras, better locks, and a reinforced back door could be installed. Thankfully, they did not come back, and we were able to enjoy our new apartment without worrying. This is still so scary to me because of that voice. Make sure you lock your doors and check who's there before opening the door. When I was 10 years old, my parents and I went to visit my grandmother for spring break. My cousin also came to visit, and we decided we wanted to go to the YMCA for the day. My grandmother dropped us off and said she would come and pick us up in 4 hours. On that day, the YMCA was empty. There were a couple of adults in the exercise room, but that's it. We went to the basketball court, and after 2 hours of playing tag and shooting baskets, we were bored. I've never been the biggest fan of swimming, but this YMCA had a pretty cool pool, so we changed into our bathing suits and headed in there. The pool was empty except for the lifeguard. We played a bunch of games and swam laps, but after about an hour, there wasn't much left to do, and there was no one except us to hang out with to keep things interesting. So we decided to play a game of seeing how long we could hold our breath underwater. We stood in the shallow end near the clock on the wall so we could time ourselves. Instead of fully submerging, we just stuck our heads face down in the water. We did this a couple of times and I was winning. On our last round, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I figured it was my cousin giving up and telling me that I won. But instead, it was the lifeguard who told me to knock it off or she was going to have to ask us to leave the pool. Since we were tired of being in the pool, we figured we would get out, get dressed, and go back to the basketball court until my grandmother picked us up. We only had an hour left anyways, and the water was freezing. As we got out, the lifeguard stopped us and asked if we wanted to go into the sauna to warm up and dry off. The sign said 18 years or older, so of course we were super excited that she allowed us to do that. She walked us to the sauna and unlocked the door. The door was glass and the interior was made entirely out of wood. Inside, above the door, there was a clock, probably to help make sure you were not in there for an unsafe amount of time. The lifeguard stand was adjacent to the sauna, but if you looked out the door, you could clearly see it. She followed us in and went over to the thermometer, encased in plastic, and unlocked it so she could crank up the heat. I figured that she must have to turn it on each time, so I didn't think anything of it. Both my cousin and I were very short girls, and so we couldn't see the temperature that was printed on the thermometer knob, but I know she was turning up the heat. Then she left and shut the door behind her. I thought I saw her lock the door too, but I thought to myself, why would she lock the door when we might want to get out? I checked the clock and decided we should get out in around 10 or 15 minutes. It was already plenty warm in the sauna, but now the room was blazing. It felt nice because I was so cold from the pool. After about 15 minutes, it was starting to get a little bit too hot, and my cousin agreed that we should leave so we can get dressed. I went to turn the knob on the door, but it wasn't budging. I thought maybe it was jammed, so I shook it, but it still wasn't opening. And then I let my cousin try. She couldn't get it open either. We figured the lifeguard would be back in a couple of minutes, so we sat back down and waited. The room was getting hotter now too. I really wanted to leave. I got up and started banging on the door and shaking and twisting the knob, trying to get the lifeguard's attention. My cousin got up and joined me. We started screaming at the top of our lungs for her to let us out, but she just stared straight ahead. I don't think there's any way that she couldn't have noticed or heard two little girls banging and kicking the door, screaming. Now, we had been in there for about 25 minutes. It was so hot in the sauna that it hurt to breathe. It felt like my lungs were on fire. My eyes and skin were burning. We sat back down and put our towels over our heads because they were still a little damp and it made it easier to breathe. I was so worried about my cousin, as she's a couple years younger than me. I looked at the clock and saw that we had been in there for 35 minutes. I got up and walked to the door again and saw the lifeguard still just staring straight ahead. Again, I tried to get her attention by screaming that we needed out and banging on the door as hard as I could, but still nothing. I was starting to get pretty dizzy, so I went to go sit back down, but the wooden seats of the sauna burned my skin. My towel was completely dry, so I put it underneath me to sit on. My hair was also dry, but I wrapped it across my face to cover my nose, and I squinted my eyes so they didn't burn as bad, but I could still watch if anyone walked past the door. It helped a little bit. My cousin was laying face down with the towel over her head, not moving or saying anything, so I nudged her to make sure she was still okay. She was, but I could tell that we really needed to get out of there soon because she seemed a bit disoriented. It had been 45 minutes now, and I was extremely nauseous. There was no way that the lifeguard would forget that we were in there, and I thought she would have come back soon, but there was this little voice in my head telling me that maybe she purposely locked us in there. Finally, a man walked past the door towards the pool, but for some reason, I just couldn't get up. My whole body was on fire, and I felt so dizzy. Luckily, this man wasn't going to the pool. He wanted to be let into the sauna, and he came back with a lifeguard. I saw them walking this way and immediately jumped up to grab my cousin. I knew now that for sure she had locked us in there because she pulled out her keys to unlock the door and let the man in. I didn't want to take any chances of us being trapped in there any longer, so as the man was trying to walk in, I was trying to shove our way out. As we were going out, the lifeguard started trying to shut the door and push us back with it. The man was clearly confused about what was going on and said, I think they want out." The lifeguard let out a sigh and opened the door fully as we ran away as fast as we could into the changing room. We only had about 10 minutes before our grandmother was supposed to pick us up. We were both so shaken by what had just happened that we didn't say anything to each other as we got dressed or on the car ride home. When we got back to the house, my parents were making us dinner, and I told them the story of what just happened. They thought that I must have been exaggerating, and they didn't believe me. I truly think that that woman was going to cook us alive in there. The only bit of doubt that I have is what would have happened if we actually died. She obviously would have gotten the blame. What was her endgame? I'm 21 now, but I still think about this interaction all the time. And when I'm in small spaces or I get too warm, I have panic attacks. No one believes this story, and I get it, it's pretty absurd. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to ask for opinions, but do you think this could have been just some crazy misunderstanding? Or do you think she really left us in there to die, and why? A few years ago, I was working at a pizza chain in my hometown as a driver. I was 27, but made darn good money delivering. I had worked a few other places, both local and chain, in the years before, and still work as a dasher on occasion even after this happened. Now I choose to deliver in much safer areas for this reason. I got luckier than I could ever imagine. One night I was working and had a double, 2 deliveries to take. Both were cash orders. I had $12 left in my bank, which is what drivers are given to use as change for cash orders, so you don't have a ton of cash on you at all times. The first order went smoothly. The guy gave me $50 for a $35 order, so I was excited about the nice tip. I drove to the second delivery. It was at an apartment complex with multiple buildings. I had delivered there before. The sun was about to set, but it was still very light out. The chain I worked at had us drive company cars with the logo on it, all white sedans. I grab the order and go to the door to the apartment building. A young guy comes out, and a much bigger, older guy was outside smoking a cigarette. The big guy went inside as the smaller guy came out. He looked around nervously and asked how much he owed me. The way he was looking around just made me very nervous. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I told him the amount, and he said that wasn't what he was told on the phone. Something was very wrong. I felt someone else walk out behind me from the door as the first young guy looked around down the parking lot, craning his neck as if he was looking for someone. I told him the amount again and broke down the order for him, trying to keep calm. Then the first guy held a gun to my right temple. I also felt a poke on my spine. 2 gunmen. I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't form no matter how hard I tried. "Give me your money and keys now," the first guy growled, and I fumbled immediately for the keys. I gave him my bank, but hadn't realized the 50 was mixed in. I gave him the keys, trying my best to remain calm. Another guy came up from my left. He had poofy hair and was around the same age as the first kid. The one behind me I hadn't seen yet. The poofy hair kid grabbed the pizza bag and ran off and hid, while the first kid searched the company car. Luckily, I had left my wallet in my personal car, but I saw him grab my cell phone. That's when the panic began to set in. I had pictures on that phone that I hadn't backed up of my then 5-year-old son, who was absolutely my world. "Please, please don't take that. I have pictures of my son who died on there. It's all I have of him, please," I lied. "My son is very much alive." The kid behind me spoke softly. "Trust me, just listen to him. You'll get it back undamaged. I don't want to be here either." I could tell he'd been crying by how his voice sounded. A car began pulling in, and the 3 boys took off to the other end of the complex in a full sprint. Before the one behind me ran, he dropped the gun in front of me. A standard issue 9mm silver and black, safety off. Looked completely real to me. He picked it back up and ran with the others. The car that pulled in saw me. It was a woman and her kid. Panic set in as I realized they could easily come back and do way worse to me as the sky started to get dark. I collapsed. They had taken my company car keys, $72, the pizza, and my phone. The woman ran up to me and asked if I was alright. She took me into her apartment in the next building over and locked the door. I was shaking so hard I couldn't even hold her phone to talk to 911 as she set down her kid. Her boyfriend, I assumed, helped me call. I spoke to the operator and told her everything. I'm colorblind, but these guys were obviously wearing all black and white clothes, thank God. I had a full description on 2 of them. The poor woman who helped me was going to be late for work, but she still stayed until I was off the phone and the cops had shown up. Man, she was harsh and blunt with the operator, but I will never forget this woman's utter kindness to me and her boyfriends. Cops showed up and contacted my store, and my manager brought out the spare keys for me to drive the car back to the store. After dealing with the cops, I drove back and was greeted by crying and beyond worried coworkers. All of them were terrified that I was hurt. It meant a lot to me how much they cared, but I told them I was fine. I filed the proper paperwork, and the 72 was written off as a loss to the store. Thank God, because I had worked other stores that make you pay back the money out of pocket if you get robbed to prevent drivers from stealing. I was told by the owner to take the rest of the night off and take care of myself. He gave me a hug. He was, to this day, one of the best bosses I ever had. What I didn't know was I was in for a very long night. I called my best friend before I left the store from the store phone and asked where he was. We usually meet up for drinks after work. He was around the corner at a bar, so I met up with him. His dad was a District 4 cop in my city at the time, the same district that this happened in. He told me his dad had given him a heads up and he had 2 shots waiting for me to calm my nerves. After the shots, we began playing pool when his dad called his phone and asked if I was with him yet. He said yeah and handed me the phone. His dad then asked if I could come down to the station. I was honest and told him I'd had 2 shots, so he sent out a squad car to get me since it wasn't that far away. When we get to the station, they had suspects in custody and I was needed to ID them. 3 boys and a driver. They had been caught less than 20 minutes after the robbery while speeding. The bolo had already gone out and they matched the description. They had used the money to buy weed and gas and had taken off. They had at least 15 stolen cell phones on them. The order had been placed on a stolen phone, and my phone was in the mix in the box. The police told me to grab my phone only, and I did, and they asked me to unlock it. It had fingerprint verification, so that was easy. 9 of the 10 tries to unlock it had already been used before my phone would have completely locked. I told the police every detail of what happened yet again, but then my parental instincts kicked in. I told them the guy behind me quite obviously was bullied into this and to show mercy on him. He was the one with the white shirt. The police went wide-eyed and told me he was the one talking. The other 3 denied involvement. That's when I found out about the 4th guy, the driver. We found out later he was completely unaware of the robbery and was just picking up his friends, so he was never charged. The boy who was behind me and the one who grabbed the pizza were 15 and 16, and each got 6 months of house arrest. The only reason the one behind me got off easy despite having the gun to my back was because I asked them to go easy on him, saying that he was a good kid who didn't want to be there, and he was the only one confessing. It makes sense because he had even said the other guy wouldn't have the phone for long. He was planning on going to the cops had they not been caught. But the other guy, the first kid who put the gun to my temple, it was his 18th birthday. He got the book thrown at him. In the courtroom, he made fun of me and was laughing at me. Seeing him made me panic. The judge scolded him for his behavior, and he just grinned and glared at me with a Joker-like smile. All I could see was pure evil. This kid will commit more crimes. I have no doubt he will eventually end someone's life. You can see how cold he is by just looking into his eyes. Evil incarnate. I grew up in a town full of murders and abusers, but I had never seen this kind of evil in my life, and I never want to see it again. I asked to have my name stricken from the records and to remain anonymous in case he ever got out, and I'm so glad I did, because today I got a letter from the state. He's being released in February. The court only had my old address, my parents' house, and my mom didn't think the letter was important. I missed the deadline to protest his release for probation. The plea deal was 8 years, and it's only been 4. He's getting out early due to overcrowding, not good behavior, overcrowding, this coming February, and I'm ready if he finds me. My wife, my parents, everyone I know knows his face and name. If he tries anything, we're ready, but for his sake, let's not meet. I'm a 52-year-old female and was traveling by car to an out-of-town job assignment. I had stopped at a popular and busy gas station / travel stop to fill up the car, stretch my legs, use the restroom, and grab a snack. I was approached by a developmentally disabled woman who appeared to be in her mid-20s. She was looking for a ride to a town a couple of towns over. Her ride had abandoned her while she was in the restroom. She was a little upset. She didn't have a cell phone and didn't know any phone numbers so I could call someone for her. I checked with the employees at the store, and they said that she had been there for about an hour looking for a ride because she said her friends left her while she was in the restroom. I then made the decision to do something I've never done before: offer a stranger a ride. I wasn't going to the town she wanted to go to, but I was heading in that direction, and I told her I could drop her off at the grocery store in the next town, where I would be turning off to go to my destination. The grocery store was always busy, and it was very likely she'd have an easier time getting a ride to where she wanted to go. Also, she'd be only 5 miles away from where she wanted instead of 25 miles, and would have an easier time walking that distance if she had to. This was agreeable to her, and we set off. But right away, I noticed a van following us. I tried to lose the van, but it kept pace. Meanwhile, the woman wanted to play with my phone. I told her no, it wasn't a toy, it was for work, and I moved it out of her reach. The van speeds up and starts to get closer. The woman suddenly remembers her boyfriend's phone number and we need to call him, but I can't use my phone while driving. I was approaching the outskirts of the business district of the next town, and no cell phone use while driving signs were everywhere. I told her, we're almost to the grocery store, we can call him from the parking lot. She becomes agitated and yells, "No, you have to take me home." I told you I can't do that. I'm not going there. It's in the opposite direction of where I need to go, and I'm expected soon. We'll call him from the parking lot. She becomes more upset and frustrated, and the van keeps getting closer. I pull into the grocery store parking lot. It's about 4 p.m. The grocery store is busy. I pull up in front of the store and ask for her boyfriend's number, but now she can't remember his number. She won't get out of the car. She's arguing with me, and the van is pulling into the parking lot. I see a sheriff's deputy parked nearby, and I roll down my window and signal that I need to speak to him. He walks over and asks me what's going on. I tell him where I met the woman, and now she won't get out of the car, and under my breath I tell him the van has been following us. The deputy tells the woman, "She brought you where you asked her to. It's time for you to leave her car now." She slowly gets out, and I ask once more for her boyfriend's number, and she says, "You're crazy. I don't have a boyfriend. Oh look, there are my friends now," and she points to the damn van. The deputy and I share a look, and he says, "Give me your contact info. I can delay them for about 20 minutes while I check their license and registration and lecture them about abandoning a special needs adult. You get out of here, and I'll check on you before my shift is over, and don't pick up any more hitchhikers." I left and went on to my destination. The deputy called me to make sure I got to where I was going, and told me they were keeping an eye on the van and its owner. He told me he also contacted a colleague at the sheriff's department in the county where I was working, and that she would contact me in a day or two. While I was on assignment there, I spoke to 2 deputies and a detective about the woman and the van. No one ever told me anything about them, but they were very interested. My nightmare is one day I'll turn on a true crime show and see a report about this woman and her gang robbing and killing people. So, woman looking for a ride at the travel stop, let's not meet again. In my early 20s, I landed a receptionist job in a sales office at a manufactured housing community. It was my first office job after working many years in daycare and the food and drink industry. I was so excited. I greeted potential buyers, set up appointments, and staged the spec homes with our stock of furniture and decorations. I worked with one other person in the office who was the salesman. When he was out of the office, I took potential buyers through our homes and gathered their information for follow-up. I was working alone one day when a customer came into the office looking to potentially purchase his first home. I gathered some information from the young man and asked if he would like to take a look at some of our homes. As we walked down the sidewalk toward the row of homes, we chatted about various floor plans and finishes available. I knew all of the product information and had no trouble confidently answering his questions. He was friendly and reminded me of a classmate from high school that had played on the football team. I decided to show him the 2 home models that best fit his price range and desired floor plan. Since I shared most of the technical information during the first home tour, I gave him some space to freely look around the second home. He walked through the main living area and stopped in the doorway to one of the back bedrooms. He called out, "Hey, what is this back here?" and pointed to the corner of the room that I couldn't see from where I was standing. But I knew the floor plans by heart, so I politely answered that that was a closet. In my mind, I was thinking sarcastically, "Really? You don't know what a closet is?" He chuckled and asked again, "No, really, come here. What is this back here?" I could tell by his tone that he was pressuring me to come see for myself. He motioned for me to come closer and take a look. His tone was friendly, but his request didn't make sense, so I paused. And in that split second, something shifted. Maybe it was the energy in the air, the hairs on my neck standing straight up, or the way his eyes changed before me. I suddenly sensed the power dynamic had shifted, and I did not feel safe. With all the lightheartedness I could muster, I repeated, "Oh, it's a closet. Excuse me for a moment, I need to check on something outside." I quickly made my exit back to the sidewalk outside the house. I had no concrete reason for why I felt the overwhelming need to leave the house immediately. I didn't understand why my body sensed danger, I just knew I needed to act quickly. Over the next few days, the young man came back to the office to meet with the salesman. He filled out all the various paperwork needed to purchase a home and live within the community. He dropped by several more times unannounced to check on his application status. If I wasn't there, he would ask the salesman when I worked next. My coworker thought I had a not-so-secret admirer, but I couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something wasn't right. So on the nights I worked alone, I locked the office door. A few days later, corporate sent back their analysis of the young man's application and completed background check. He had been denied. The background check revealed multiple assault convictions, and there it was, crystal clear, undeniable 2020 hindsight. The salesman called the customer right away to let him know his application had been denied and that we could not do anything further for him. A few days later, the young man decided to come back to the office once more. When my coworker saw the man's vehicle turning into our parking lot, he told me to go to the back room of the office where I would be out of sight. And just like the times before, he entered the office asking if I was working. This time, he was met by a very angry 6-foot salesman that had nothing to lose. I had never heard my coworker raise his voice before, but on that day, his voice shook the office walls. Needless to say, the man never came by again, and I wasn't scheduled to work alone nearly as often. Thank you for watching True Scary Stories from Reddit. Comment below which of these stories was your favorite. If you enjoyed today's video, please drop a like on it, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more. Hit the bell icon to be notified when new videos go live. That's all for today. Till next time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the next one.